somewhere around 13,000 years ago. In a cave in what's now northern Israel, someone scraped the bottom of a stone bowl and found something strange. The grain inside hadn't just gone bad, it had changed. It smelled sharper, sweeter, almost alive. And whoever found it did something we'd all consider questionable today. They tasted it anyway. What happened next didn't just give humans their first taste of alcohol. It may have quietly nudged our ancestors toward farming, toward staying in one place, toward the very beginnings of life as we know it. And at the time, nobody had any idea what they'd just stumbled onto. This is the story of how a forgotten bowl of wet grain became one of the most consumed drinks on the planet, and how a mistake nobody meant to make ended up shaping the world. Before any of this happened, life looked nothing like it does now. There were no farms, no fields of grain stretching to the horizon, no bread ovens. People moved. They followed herds, followed seasons, followed whatever the land offered that week. Food security wasn't a concept, it was a daily gamble. But in certain parts of the world, wild grains grew in thick patches, and people had started gathering them, not farming yet. Just collecting, storing it, soaking it in water to soften it, mashing it into a thick paste that could be cooked into something like porridge or flattened into early bread. That wet grain mash didn't always get eaten right away. Sometimes it sat in a basket, in a clay pot, in a corner of a shelter, slowly being forgotten while life carried on around it. Inside that pot, while nobody's paying attention, something is happening. Air is full of tiny, invisible specks, floating dust, drifting wherever the wind takes them, landing on everything, including food. Most of the time, nothing comes of it. But grain mash, sitting wet and warm, is basically an open invitation. Those invisible specks start feeding on the sugars in the soaked grain. And as they feed, something starts to bubble. Nobody asked for this. Nobody set it up. It just happened quietly, in the dark, over days. Somebody comes back to that pot. Maybe they're hungry. Maybe they just don't want to waste food. Grain was valuable. Tossing it out wasn't something people did casually. And what they find isn't the thick, dry, grainy mash they left behind. It's foaming slightly. The smell has shifted, less like raw grain, more like something fermented, a little sour, a little sweet, almost fruity. There's a layer of cloudy liquid sitting on top of the solids, and they drink it. We don't know who that person was. We never will. But this kind of accident happened. Not once, but over and over, in different villages, different valleys, probably different centuries. Completely independent of each other. Beer wasn't invented. It was discovered repeatedly by accident anywhere humans were storing wet grain long enough for it to start changing on its own. That first sip wouldn't have tasted great by modern standards. Sour, grainy, more like drinkable porridge than the crisp pint you'd order today. But the taste wasn't the point. It was the feeling. After a cup or two, something shifts. The body warms. Worries get quieter. People talk more, laugh easier, feel bolder. For someone living in a world where every day carried real physical risk, predators, hunger, conflict, that feeling would have been completely new, unfamiliar, maybe even a little frightening at first, but also unmistakably good. For a long time, the assumption was simple. Humans started farming grain, and beer came along later as a happy side effect, something people figured out how to do because they had so much surplus grain sitting around. But some of the oldest hints of beer-like drinks we've found come from places where people were still mostly hunting and gathering. Not yet full-time farmers. Big group gatherings, large stone bowls, traces of fermented grain mush, all from a time before farming had fully taken hold. Farming give us beer, or did the want for more of this strange mood-changing drink help convince people that farming was worth the back-breaking effort? It's just a theory, nobody can prove it. But farming grain is hard, it's slow, it's risky, it ties you to one spot for an entire season. For a long time, simply gathering food was actually easier. So what would push people to commit to fields, to planting, to staying put? Maybe it wasn't just bread. Maybe it was also the promise of a steady supply of something that made gatherings better, made celebrations more memorable, made meetings between different groups go a little smoother. Beer might not have been just a result of people settling down. It might have been one of the reasons they did. Some of the earliest hints of beer-like drinks are older than clear signs of permanent houses in some of these same regions. Older than full-blown farming. Older in some cases than settled village life as we typically imagine it. People living in caves, moving with the seasons, not yet farmers in any modern sense, were already gathering in large groups and getting mildly buzzed together on fermented grain mush long before anyone built a proper town, long before cities, long before writing, long before anything we'd recognize as civilization. People were already doing this. The party came before the permanent address. Specific process with this specific result gave people something to chase. They started experimenting. Soak the grain, mash it. Leave it somewhere warm. Wait. They learned which grains worked better, how long to wait, which containers gave a better result. Trial and error, repeated across generations, slowly turning an accident into a skill, and this wasn't a one-off. On the other side of the world, in ancient China, stumbled onto a similar process completely independently, soaking rice, adding honey and fruit, and ending up with their own fermented drink. Same accident, different ingredients, different continent. Nobody copied anyone. Beer stopped being a mystery, became something people made on purpose. Grain itself was already a way to store food for lean times. But turning some of that grain into beer gave people something that lasted longer than plain water, and in many places was honestly safer to drink than water pulled straight from a river or pond. Beer also made grain easier on the body. Softer, sweeter, easier to swallow, easier for children and older people to handle. Biggest impact wasn't about food or health at all. It was social. Beer brought people together, smoothed over tension between neighboring groups. It became part of how early communities marked important moments. Births, deaths, agreements, celebrations. In a world where unrelated families were beginning to live closely together for the first time, something that made gatherings warmer, looser, more bonded had real value. Beer spread because the recipe was simple enough for anyone to copy. Grain, water, time, warmth. And because the effect of beer fit perfectly into what early communities actually needed. Nobody marketed it. Nobody decided it was the future. It just worked, and it spread on its own. What started as something brewed at home, in someone's kitchen alongside their bread, slowly turned into something bigger. People who were especially good at it started brewing for whole villages, then for temples and feasts, then for entire towns. What was once a happy accident in a forgotten pot eventually became a full-time job, and centuries later, an entire industry with its own rules, recipes, and traditions all over the world. Somewhere, thousands of years ago, someone left wet grain sitting too long. They didn't throw it away. They tasted it. That single, small, almost lazy decision, born out of not wanting to waste food, set off a chain reaction that may have helped shape how humans started farming, brought early communities together in ways they never had before, and eventually filled the fridge in your kitchen right now. Next time you're holding a cold one, think about that moment. Somewhere, thousands of years before anyone wrote anything down, someone took a risk on something that smelled a little off and changed the course of human history without ever knowing it.